Anyone to join again? Right, let's start. Right, so this is where general adding test steps are. So testing steps you are adding depends on the type of application we are developing. If the application where we are making some changes in the existing component, then the structure is different. Because if you want to add any components, components testing will be added, step of component testing will be added. And any changes you are making in between, regression testing, this is where those steps will be added. But whereas in some occasions, we develop the project from the scratch. From the scratch, we are building the application. So whenever we want to build the application from the scratch, the structure is different because you are building the application from the scratch, where whatever the testing process has to be performed, so that will be regular, right? So you don't see any modifications or any add-ons and all. Everything you have to start it from the beginning. So testing of steps is depending on the type of project are we taking. And the third step is sometimes there will be some legacy and migration projects. Legacy and migration projects means the project, whatever we are working on, there will be a legacy application we are working. Legacy old applications were there, where we are making data migration, right? So we are doing migration from legacy applications to the new application. That's what generally we do. So whenever there is a migration process is involved in application development, there is a importance of data migration we do. Whenever we are migrating the data, the format of data will be different because traditionally, whatever the data we have is different. And when there is a migration of data we are doing, the format of data can be in XML or it can be JSON or maybe in any other format. So here in this context also, whenever there is a migration projects going on, even adding steps and all, everything will also be included in it. This is where generally, if there are any needed steps to be added and all, everything will be taken into consideration. Next is to establish trace relationships. This is where generally we call it as RTM. We call it as RTM. What is RTM stands for? RTM stands for Requirement Traceability Matrix. If you remember, when I explained about requirement lifecycle management, I have explained this concept on a high level, right? So requirement lifecycle requirement traceability matrix. Requirement traceability matrix. So this requirement traceability matrix will make us to understand the connect between use cases to test cases. Use cases to test cases. Use cases are completely focused on the development perspective. Based on the development perspective. But whereas when it comes to test cases itself is concerned, this is all something belongs to testing perspective. So use cases are completely belongs to development perspective. Test cases are belongs to testing perspective. So whatever the use cases we have developed, the same thing has to be tested. And whatever the test cases we have developed, the same thing has to be developed. There must be an interconnection between these two. So for that reason, we have to establish a traceability matrix. This is where generally requirement traceability matrix stands for use cases to test cases to use cases. So if it is use cases to test case, for example, if it is from use cases to test cases, this is where we call it as forward traceability. This is where we call it as forward traceability. Now, if you are doing from test cases to use cases, for example, This is where generally we call it as backward traceability. This is where we call it as backward traceability, right? So use cases to test cases is a forward traceability. Test cases to use cases is the backward traceability. Whatever the result we want to see, the result must be the same. The result must be the one, right? So because there shouldn't be any change, then only this traceability matrix will make us to will consider it as successful. Otherwise, it won't get successful. So this is where generally establishing the tracing of relationships is not something essentially important whenever we are working on the RTM part. This is where general requirement traceability matrix. To remember, requirement traceability matrix will be done in the initial stages of the project development. It is not at the time of project development. We will be preparing before and we are keeping it ready. So once the traceability relationships were completed, we have to publish the test suits. Means whatever the required application to be published, everything will be prepared and it will be submitted, right? Test suits and all, everything will be submitted over here. This is where generally this test development and all, everything will be come into picture. This is what generally test development stands for. Now, whenever we are working on coming back to the test planning again. So what is that we are doing? We have to create a test plan. We need to create test objectives. Next, we have to create test group. We need to create test cases. It depends on the kind of project we are working on. If there is any adding of test steps and all, everything that will be added. We have to establish a requirement traceability matrix and we have to publish the test suits. Now, what we have to do once we have created an objects and all, these objectives based on the objectives, what is that we have taken, that we have to add it onto the planned test. Means whatever the testing that what is that we are planning. This is where generally planning of text and all everything were connected. This is where generally this planning of test again depends on the kind of linking of objectives, because test planning is different, test execution is different. Test planning is what we do at the time of before we are going to start the project. This is where test planning stands for. But when it comes to the test execution, as I told you, whatever the objectives we have identified, right? So whatever the objectives we have identified, the same objectives must be in test execution also. There shouldn't be separate, because test execution is a practical understanding of the work, what is that we are doing. This is where generally creation of test objectives and all everything come into picture. So now when we talk about, so when we're talking about creation of test objectives, either in the planning level as well as execution level, both must be same. Both must be same. The reason why whenever we are planning test, whenever we are adding the planning test and all everything, these objectives will be linked. So these creation of test objectives as well as in the planning level as well as test execution level must be the same. This is where one has to understand, right? So this is where, because there will be a parallel connect between test planning to test execution, which we have to be seen with. Now we have to review the status. When this review of the status will happen, whenever there is a testing process happens. Again, this testing process has two different things. One is manual process and second is an automation process. So if it is manual process and all everything, whatever the results we have identified and all everything, we have to update here. So when do we update this? Make sure we have to complete the automation process. Automation process means whatever the testing we want to do using irrespective of the tools we use. Either it can be of different tools like Selenium, etc. All that. Whatever the test results we have identified and all everything. So those test results has to be updated. So those are all will be updated in the manual part. So manual template will be prepared. What are the test cases or what are the test environments we have to develop and all everything will be prepared prior. Once the development started, whatever the coding or whatever the user interface designs and all everything were tested. So the final results will be prepared in the test case document, and that test case document, which is all part of manual, this will be sent to the review. This is where generally this review of test status is what we have to see. Review of test status might be 100% successful sometimes, because If everything goes fine, review test status and all, everything will be positive. Otherwise, what will happen? Otherwise, there will be some defects which we have identified. Again, that will be sent back to the automation testing. Again, that will be given back to the development team. Again, whatever the necessary user interface changes to be made, or else it can be coding level changes if you want to make. Everything will be done by them. And again, that will be sent back to the test session. From the test session and all, it will be sent to the review. This is where generally overall test management plan for any of the project whenever we are working will be done like this. Is it clear to everyone? Anurodh, Karan, Mamata, Pragati, Prajwal, Pratigya, Sapna, Sushma. Any questions on this regard? Is there any questions? Okay, then we'll meet again on Monday. We discuss more further. See you then. Bye.
Okay, thank you, sir. Bye.